Every war has a moment when the side that started it realizes the cost is higher than the invoice it prepared for. This is that moment. The Gulf Cooperation Council states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman, are discussing the withdrawal of their sovereign wealth fund investments from the United States and allied Western markets. $2 to $3 trillion. The number is so large that most people will read it and feel nothing, because there is no intuitive scale for $2 to $3 trillion that connects it to anything in ordinary human experience. Let me give you the scale. The entire annual GDP of France is approximately $3 trillion. The entire annual GDP of the United Kingdom is approximately $3 trillion. $2 to $3 trillion is the combined economic output of one of the world's largest economies, accumulated over decades of Gulf oil revenues and parked in American treasuries, American equities, American real estate, American private equity, American infrastructure, the financial architecture of the American economy itself. And the Gulf states are discussing pulling it out, not because they have lost faith in American financial markets in the abstract, not because they found a better return somewhere else, because the country whose military launched this war from their runways, whose bases are being struck by Iranian missiles on their soil, whose operations have closed the Strait of Hormuz and stopped their energy exports and produced budget strains that their finance ministries are now modeling as a multi-year structural problem. That country is asking them to stay invested, to stay aligned, to stay patient, while their sovereign wealth is sitting in American assets and their refineries are burning and their tankers cannot move. The Gulf states are asking a question that every investor eventually asks when the relationship between their capital and their security stops making sense. Why is our money here? Let me explain what $2 to $3 trillion actually means inside the American financial system, because the number only becomes real when you understand where it sits and what it does. The largest single pool of Gulf investment in the United States is in U.S. Treasury bonds. Gulf sovereign wealth funds, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, the Saudi Public Investment Fund, the Kuwait Investment Authority, the Qatar Investment Authority, collectively hold hundreds of billions of dollars in American government debt. That debt is the mechanism through which the United States government finances the gap between what it spends and what it collects in taxes. When Gulf states buy American treasuries, they are lending money to the American government at the interest rate printed on the bond. When those bonds mature, the American government pays them back, and the Gulf states typically reinvest the proceeds in new bonds. The system works as long as the Gulf states keep buying. If the Gulf states stop buying, if they redirect their sovereign wealth fund capital away from American treasuries and toward other assets and other currencies, the demand for American government debt decreases. When demand for any bond decreases, the price falls. When the price of a bond falls, the yield, the effective interest rate, rises. American government borrowing costs go up. In a government that is already running a significant fiscal deficit and financing it through continuous bond issuance, higher borrowing costs are not an abstract economic inconvenience. They are a direct increase in the cost of every dollar of government spending. Defense, Social Security, interest on the existing debt, which compounds against itself. Gulf sovereign wealth in American treasuries is not a passive holding. It is a structural support for the American government's ability to borrow at the rates it has historically borrowed at. $2 to $3 trillion of that support is under discussion for withdrawal. Then there are the equities. Gulf sovereign wealth funds hold significant positions in American corporations. Technology companies, financial institutions, energy companies, real estate investment trusts. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority alone manages approximately $900 billion in assets with significant American equity exposure. The Saudi Public Investment Fund has made headline investments in American companies across sectors. When large institutional investors with positions of this scale begin selling, not dumping, not panic selling, but systematically rotating out of a market, the effect on equity prices is measurable, sustained, and self-reinforcing. Other investors see the institutional outflows, they draw conclusions, they adjust their own positions. $2 to $3 trillion leaving American markets is not a sale, it is a revaluation. Now understand why the Gulf states are having this discussion now in the specific context of what this conflict has done to their economies. The GCC article cited 3 interlocking pressures: budget strains, reduced energy sales, disrupted tourism and business activity. Start with the budget strains. Saudi Arabia's 2024 budget was constructed around an oil price assumption of approximately $80 per barrel. At $80, the Saudi government can fund Vision 2030, the sovereign transformation project that is the Crown Prince's defining political commitment, while maintaining its social spending obligations and its defense budget. The oil price is above $130 this morning, which sounds like good news for a petrostate, but Saudi Arabia cannot sell its oil. Ras Tanura is damaged. The Strait of Hormuz is closed with lethal enforcement. The tankers that would carry Saudi crude to Asian and European buyers are sitting at anchor in the Gulf or staying outside it. High oil prices with zero export volume is not a revenue boom. It is a budget crisis dressed in the appearance of a commodity rally. The Kuwait Investment Authority, the Gulf's oldest sovereign wealth fund established in 1953, the fund that kept the Kuwaiti government operational during the Iraqi occupation of 1990, when Kuwait had no oil revenue at all, is now being looked at as a war chest, not for investment, for survival. Kuwait's government spending is financed by oil revenues that have stopped flowing. The investment fund that was built to provide intergenerational wealth is being assessed for its capacity to cover a budget gap that is being created in real time by a conflict Kuwait did not choose and cannot exit. That is not what sovereign wealth funds are built for. That is not the use case that decades of disciplined investment were supposed to produce. The Kuwait Investment Authority was built to make Kuwait rich in perpetuity. It is now being discussed as a reserve fund for a wartime budget crisis. Then, the tourism. Dubai received 17 million international visitors in 2023. Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Qatar. The Gulf's tourism sector has been one of the most successful economic diversification stories of the last decade. Expo 2020, the FIFA World Cup, Formula One, the financial services and hospitality infrastructure that has been built to make the Gulf a destination rather than a transit point. That infrastructure depends on international visitors feeling safe, on airlines flying, on airports operating, on a geopolitical environment that does not make your vacation itinerary a risk assessment exercise. Airports have been disrupted. Airlines have rerouted. The expatriate workers who staff the hotels and restaurants and construction sites, the workers who make the Gulf's economic development model physically function, are calculating whether to renew their contracts or book a flight home. Every expatriate who leaves takes skills, spending, and economic activity with them. The Gulf's economic diversification model is premised on attracting and retaining international talent, capital, and visitors. All three are currently in outbound mode. The business activity disruption is the multiplier on all of the above. The Gulf has spent a decade positioning itself as a hub for international business, financial services, logistics, technology, professional services. That positioning depends on the Gulf being perceived as stable, predictable, and safe. A region where Iranian missiles are striking energy infrastructure. American bases are absorbing mass casualty attacks. The Strait of Hormuz is closed with drone enforcement. And sovereign wealth funds are discussing emergency asset reallocation is not the region that international businesses chose to anchor their regional headquarters in. Discussions about repatriating regional headquarters, about relocating staff, about whether the Gulf hub model survives a conflict of this duration and intensity. Those discussions are happening in boardrooms in London and New York and Singapore this morning. And the Gulf states know it. $2 to $3 trillion of investment discussion is the financial system's expression of a single underlying reality. The Gulf states are paying for a war they did not authorize with resources they spent decades building. And they are running the calculation on whether the American alliance that produced this situation is worth what it is currently costing them. And that calculation has a name in international relations. It is called realignment. Realignment does not happen overnight. It does not happen in a press release. It does not happen in a single dramatic announcement. It happens in the accumulation of smaller decisions. Phone calls returned, investment mandates shifted, diplomatic relationships deepened on one side and cooled on another, that over months and years produce a fundamentally different map of who is aligned with whom. The discussion of withdrawing $2 to $3 trillion from American markets is the financial leading indicator of realignment. It is the sovereign wealth funds asking, if we are going to restructure our security relationships, what does the financial restructuring look like? If the American military presence is going to be reassessed? If Putin's phone calls are being returned, if Chinese security partnerships are being discussed, if the petrodollar arrangement that has structured Gulf American relations for 50 years is being questioned, then the financial architecture that sits on top of that arrangement needs to be reassessed too. You do not keep $2 trillion in the treasuries of a country whose security guarantee you're reconsidering. You move the money first, then you move the relationship. Russia is watching this discussion the way a creditor watches a debtor reassess his commitments. Russian sovereign wealth and Russian institutional investors are not in a position to absorb $2 to $3 trillion of Gulf capital, but Russian energy partnerships are. Russian security technology transfers are. The weapon systems, the anti-drone radar, the air defense architecture that China offered and Beijing complicated with its CM-302 denial. Russia has versions of all of it, and Russia's pitch to every Gulf leader this week has been the same pitch. We are stable, we are available, and we are not fighting wars from your runways. China is the more significant potential destination for Gulf capital reallocation. Chinese infrastructure investment, Chinese technology partnerships, the Belt and Road money that has already moved into Gulf port infrastructure and logistics. Chinese financial markets, which are increasingly liquid and increasingly capable of absorbing large institutional positions, the petro-yuan arrangements that China has been building with Gulf oil exporters for years, the framework through which Saudi Aramco has accepted yuan payment for oil sales to Chinese buyers, are the financial architecture that a realigning Gulf would move its capital toward. $2 to $3 trillion moving from dollar assets to yuan assets is not just a financial story. It is the dollar's reserve currency status, the foundation of American economic power, the mechanism through which America finances its deficit at the rates that make American military power economically sustainable, being put under pressure by the specific policy decisions of the administration that manages that military power. The war that was supposed to eliminate Iran's nuclear program is now threatening to dismantle the financial architecture of American global power. The oil is not moving. The money is discussing leaving. The Gulf states are doing the math on what the American alliance has cost them in 1 week of war. Energy revenues stopped, tourism collapsing, business activity disrupted, budget strains mounting, American bases on their soil being struck, their interceptors running low, their people at risk. $2 to $3 trillion is the number the Gulf states put on the question they are asking Washington this morning. Was this worth it? The invoice is on the table. Washington has not answered.